Welcome to the Overture Edge, a discussion with today's top business leaders about the motivations and strategies contributing to their current success. It's powered by the Overture Group, a premier executive search and compensation consulting firm dedicated to helping mid-market companies. Your host is John Liacone, the founder and managing director of the Overture Group. He has over 30 years of executive search experience and is also the founder and executive director of the Leadership Group, an executive career management and networking association in the Chicagoland area with over 475 members. Now, here's your host, John Liacone.
I want to welcome the audience to our inaugural episode of the Overture Edge. Here, we will have business conversations with top leaders in their industries. In today's episode, we will explore a subject that's really near and dear to my heart because being an executive recruiter for about 30 years and the last 25 really focusing in on the CFO and CEO, I'm really excited to bring you this episode because I've worked with a lot of very high-performing organizations, and what I've noticed is that high-performing organizations have one thing in common: their CEO and their CFO, they have a great working relationship. Today, we're honored to have Sean Burke, one of the best CFOs I've met in the past few years. Sean is the CFO of Porter Pipe and Supply. And Porter's been around since 1976. They're a privately held company. They serve the professional trades as a wholesale supplier of commercial pipe supplies, pipe, valves, fittings, HVACR equipment, and industrial and chemical products. So with that, Sean, I want to welcome you to the podcast, and I want to thank you. This is our first podcast, and I'm glad to have somebody like you right here next to me.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for the kind words, first of all. It's been a pleasure getting to know you these past couple of years.
Yeah.
And the fact that you picked me for your inaugural podcast. Congratulations, by the way. You're a man of many talents, so I'm glad to be here and happy to have this conversation today.
Yeah, excellent. Well, just real quick before we get into it, when I first met you, I was introduced by one of our leadership group members, and as soon as I met you, I said, this guy, I've got to get with one of my best clients, and I was very fortunate to do that.
Thank you.
Well, let's jump right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and kind of your elevation into the CFO role?
I would be delighted to, and thanks again for having me. So, you probably pick up, well, my accent at this stage.
Just a little.
West of Ireland boy. I joke sometimes that it's South Chicago, but it's actually West of Ireland. Grew up in a good Irish Catholic home, great upbringing. Dad was in the insurance business, and Mom was at home with myself and the three siblings. So we had a great time, fun house, lots of sport, lots of activities, and growing up on the West Coast, it was a bit wild. Weather-wise and I guess sibling-wise, it was good. But I always kind of liked numbers. That's what I liked in school. So doing a lot of math and accounting, ended up doing a CPA equivalency out of school with a Big Four public accounting firm. Thought I would be doing corporate tax returns for the rest of my life, and now I don't even do my own. So
there you go.
Of how the world can evolve. But yeah, from there, took a couple of different opportunities. One to move to the UK, and then one for a very large multi-billion-dollar food company, Kerry Ingredients, and moved to Beloit, Wisconsin with them to what was supposed to be a 2-year transfer, and worked for a very, very good CFO at that time too, who's still a mentor of mine, Olivia Nelligan, wonderful lady. I was supposed to be here for 2 years. So it was 11 years ago. So I'm here now, living in the Midwest, working for Porter Pipe, helping to raise 3 wonderful daughters. When I'm not at work, that's kind of my primary function, including girls soccer right now, our 8U team. So we're doing that, but have really enjoyed kind of a lot of the stuff that's happened in my career has happened organically. I always had a plan to be a quote unquote business leader of some sort, but when I was in public accounting, I thought I would stay there, right? So I think there's an element of some kind of a plan, but also the flexibility to kind of go with opportunities when they come along. So since Kerry, I've had a couple of different opportunities with private equity-backed firms, and now for the first time working for a family-run organization, and I feel all roads have led to this, to bring all the different experiences of a different background. Couldn't be happier we're recording this a few days after my first anniversary at Porter.
Yes.
So delighted to be there.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you very much.
It's outstanding, 1 year.
Yeah.
At that mountain site. It does. So with that, tell us a little bit about your role at Porter and what you're responsible for.
Sure. Well, when the good people at Overture put me in touch with Nick, first, it was a conversation about people. Did not know anything about the business or the industry per se. My background is predominantly in food manufacturing and distribution. So it was your good self, John, that said, hey, I want you to meet this good person.
Yeah.
And I think, as you talked about in the intro, you could almost see a vision of a CEO and a CFO working together, but then also as a kind of a personality as equals. Nick does not like people saying they work for him. We work together, and I think it's when you're really got that relationship buttoned up that you do feel like you're an equal. You do feel like you're a contributor. So having met Nick and then Bud and then Jim, the Porter family, I just wanted to work with them. Yeah. I genuinely didn't even mind what the business was. They have a magnetism to them. They have an aura and a leadership about them that they were good people. And then, the more I did my research, they've got a very, very good culture.
Yeah.
So, family house since 1976.
Yes.
Third generation.
Third gen, yeah.
Although first and second started it together. Mr. P, Ralph Porter, and then Jim and Bud. But, Nick is the grandson of the founder. And, Bud is still heavily involved in his president role as well. But it's a very different company, obviously. It's kind of had phenomenal growth over that period of time, and even in the last 3 or 4 years since Nick took over, been really, really high performing, high growth, and with that comes challenges, including at the CFO-CEO level that I'm sure we'll talk about. But really enjoyed it.
And then tell me a little bit about when you first met Nick, the CEO now of Porter. What were those initial impressions that attracted you?
He's very different to most leaders I have met, and certainly most CEOs. I would say he was very deliberate in how he spoke, which takes a bit of getting used to, but in a very positive way. And then I could see a lot of myself in him.
Okay.
In terms of ambition, in terms of very focused on people, because irrespective of the business or the industry, it's still people that make the world go round.
Sure.
I really believe that. He has a magnetism and a charisma like very few people do, and he's a natural leader. I think a lot of skills can be taught, but most of the leadership skills, in my opinion, are innate. Yeah. And he's certainly a born leader. He had a vision, which I bought into, and he also was very humble to realize there were things within the organization that they didn't necessarily have, but wanted to write that for where they were going. And we talked a lot about that, not just about the CFO, but the kind of 1 or 2 other moves ahead that were to come, and how we would navigate them potentially together.
So those early indications, you were aligned.
Certainly, and I'd say certainly aligned on the big ticket things. I don't think any relationship in the world is 100% alignment,
right?
But this is pretty close. Yeah, this is pretty close, and in fact, we've worked on that. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that today. But very early on, in terms of how we would structure a team, how we would look to strategize growth, how we would look to make sure that we were, going after things, but not in a kind of overly risky way. And certainly that's where a CFO can come in to mind the house a little bit and let the CEO have the ambition. So I felt we were aligned initially,
So that attracted you?
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. It's a lot harder to do the job if you're not. Yeah,
absolutely. You want to work with somebody. It's not that you have to, you want a job where you don't have to work with somebody, you want to work with somebody.
For sure.
And you want to make sure they're aligned, so.
And I think it's more about when things aren't going well.
Yeah.
We've talked about a lot of
we'll get into
already,
that,
but
I think that's important.
But I think building that foundation when things are going well helps you then when they may not be.
Absolutely. So when I look at the CEO-CFO relationship, I look at it from 4 different aspects. I look at it first from trust and communication. Trust, without trust, you have nothing, right? That's the foundation. Then it gets into collaboration and transparency. And then third is having a vision and a strategy. And then last but not least, something inside that we have. We have to have a will to win. So let's hit on some trust, okay? I feel most objectives and goal are achieved through trust and communication, right? It's the foundation of everything. So what are some of the tools you find most effective in establishing trust and communication?
I agree with you that trust and communication go hand in hand. I think you can't assume, you can assume trust, but you can't know it's there for sure from day one.
Yeah.
So you do have to allow for the passage of time and that that trust, first of all, establishes itself, but then you strengthen it over time. And communication is absolutely key.
Yeah.
One of the major, I guess, frictions that you see between a CFO and a CEO is, how do I bury the news, or what the news is? And my mantra, which is big at Porter and Nick's as well, is bad news doesn't age well.
Yeah.
So we one of our core values at Porter is integrity. We say it as it is. So if there's something, for example, that I see as CFO, rather than keep it from Nick, I do the opposite. Nick and the rest of the executive team, we deal with the problem head on, and we tackle it together. And oftentimes, I think once you say something out loud, it almost isn't as bad as what it is in your head. So I think the communication is an important piece. Where Nick and I are kind of still developing, but I think it's going well, is understanding that the communication itself is more important than the form of it. Meaning, don't wait to write the perfect email. Don't wait for your one-on-one.
That makes
Send
sense.
the text.
Yes.
Make the phone call. CEO, CFO, they're never off, right? So there's no such thing as don't call me at 8 o'clock at night.
Right.
Don't call me on a Saturday morning. Might pick up right away, but you follow it up with, hey, I got a couple of new things I really got to update you on. Yeah. And then there's other things that you can be a bit more formal with, follow up through email, through memos, and through your one-on-one. But knowing that the form of communication is sometimes secondary to the timing of it. That's really, really important.
And also, what I found, and I'm going to ask you this question, a lot of times that trust isn't just built 9 to 5. It's built after hours, right? After everybody's gone, and it's just you and the CEO, and you're sitting there and you're talking about the business after 5 o'clock.
Nick and I have, as a standing meeting, once a week we get together.
Okay.
But once a month, one of those, we make sure it's at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
So we can, depending on our schedules, we can either grab a bite or share a bourbon, whatever's going on in his office. Because I think you're right, it does help that part of it. Yeah. There's a lot of social engineering that goes on in our job, either with vendor partners or customers, and trying to be present at those together are very, very important.
Sure.
We're honored to have been awarded the PVF Supplier of the Year at the AD conference last week, of which we
Congratulations.
Thank you. But it was a huge deal for all of us, but particularly for Nick. So being there to be present on a professional level, but also on a personal level, so you can raise a glass and you can share a toast together, was hugely important.
Yeah.
I also think, CEOs and CFOs and all of the C-suite, sometimes they have an aura or a position of authority, but you can lose sight of the fact that they're human too.
Yes.
So there's a vulnerability and a humility that I think goes well with trust.
Yes.
Knowing, sometimes if things are going on with the CEO in his personal life or in the CFO's life, which we all have our crosses to bear. As
absolutely. We're
so,
human.
Yeah, so we're human. Whether there's a sick child or whether there's a crisis of conscience or something else we're trying to deal with. There's been times over the past year where Nick and I have shared that vulnerability and shared that, softness, I guess, in our personal lives, A, to share a problem, and B, to understand where we're coming from. But that, without even trying, I think helps build trust and confidence in each other. If you can be that honest with someone about what's going on personally, it does wonders for strengthening a professional relationship.
When you're real and authentic and vulnerable.
Yeah.
So my sense is that CFOs are uniquely positioned to guide, influence a CEO's decision-making, since you provide crucial data that leads to strategic, easy for me to say, strategic decisions. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, I would agree with that.
And why?
And even more so, John, I think, I perhaps hate to use the term, but the modern CFO, I think the role of CFO, you and I have talked about this, has changed, certainly in recent years.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't mean to be derogatory, but it's no longer, the controller that gets promoted into CFO because he's good at accounting.
Right.
That's an assumed prerequisite.
It's always been that way,
Right? A CFO, particularly the one that would harvest a good relationship with the CEO, has a broader mindset of data. So accounting is a big part of it, financials. But the human element, I speak on a daily basis to our people partner, Debbie at Porter. Good and bad, there's always things we're dealing with. Operationally, we might have this great product and we want to go out and sell it.
Yes.
What does it do for our logistics? What does it do for our supply chain?
Seeing the bigger picture,
How can we sell it from an e-commerce perspective? We want to make decisions around technology. Do you go and you get a third party, or do you kind of build in-house? So all of the data that comes into play, it starts with financial, and I guess I wouldn't be a CFO without thinking that way from my brain, but you're thinking then of the data around the people.
Yes.
What does the people impact? We're opening our 7th location in DeForest just outside Madison next year, which we're very excited about. It'll be the first time we've built from the ground up. And the financial element is huge, but it's also, what does it mean for our customers? What does it mean for our vendors? What does it mean for our existing locations? What does it mean for our people? So all of that data feeds into what I would call the engine that drives the decisions. And I think the CFO is the person best placed to play devil's advocate. We talked about alignment at the top of the podcast, John.
Yeah.
And I'm very lucky that Nick and I are aligned on most stuff, but we've developed a discipline with each other to play devil's advocate, to be really sure, even when we're aligned.
Yes.
And I think that's the biggest part that the CFO role plays, where they can challenge and say, hey, what happens if sales aren't where we need them to be? Or what happens if payroll costs get a little out of line? What is the contingency? And the CEO is by nature the visionary and the salesman and the leader. The CFO is the person who can kind of bring some realism sometimes.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, because businesses, you're riding a roller coaster. You have good times and you have bad times, right? And how do you weather the storm and keep the company on track during those tough times?
Well, I don't know if I heard it somewhere or something I say, but I find myself saying it regularly. Don't get too high and don't get
too low. Yeah.
So, for example, we've had incredible financial results since I've got there, and I can't take all the credit, just part of it.
Yeah.
No, it's a good team to kind of the momentum we've got. So when we're presenting our monthly financials as an executive group, I do remind people, these are good and well done, but here's a couple of things I'm seeing that are perhaps, an iceberg ahead that we need to watch. Similarly, when we don't hit our plan for a particular period, we remind ourselves of where we're good. So I think to keep us on an even keel is very important. I try and do that in life too. Don't get too stressed about things that are, stressful.
Sure.
But also don't get too cocky when things are good, because God's got a plan for you for that too.
Right. And we don't have, a lot of times we don't have control.
So I think keeping that middle of the road, maybe allowing others to be the champion of celebration and others to be the champion of overly worrying, but don't get too high and don't get too low. I think tries to keep us on the right track.
I want to mention a little bit before communication. A key part of your role is avoiding surprises. I know over my career, when I ask CEOs what are some of the derailing factors of the CFO, is that I've been surprised too many times. So staying ahead of the data that the CEO has, the tools and time to make meaningful and productive decisions, what do you do to make sure that the CEO is not surprised?
I think there's a couple of things. It's such a great question.
One
of the things we've already touched on is don't delay on communication. Don't wait till the books are closed and you're 10, 15 days post-Monday into deliver bad news. If you see something, early on, make sure you're communicating, because it helps manage the message. The second thing I would say is a lot of what CFOs do and traditionally have done is backward looking. You're adding up the score, you're totting up the numbers, and you're giving the news report. But you also have to have the foresight, and this is where you have to look at market trends, good market insight, intelligent data. That's a broader economy look. So regularly on a daily basis, what am I doing? I'm looking at the news. I'm reading the news.
Staying ahead,
Staying ahead on a broader economic basis. Then we're subscribing to stuff that's specific to our industry. So starting, at a wider lens, and then focusing more narrow at an industry basis. And then even more importantly, which is something that I've really developed at Porter, talking to our customers and our vendors. Because you will take all those different sectors. So, a real example, everyone has been waiting for the interest rates to drop, and that's everyone in every industry.
We all are, yes.
And then you look at specifically what does it mean for our industry.
Sure.
So our industry, we're seeing, a lot of infrastructure work is keeping a lot of businesses going. In other areas, it's quiet. There's big mega projects like some data center work that's going on, and then other people are quiet. So then you narrow it down to our specific customers and our specific vendors. So you take all of that broader lens, that gives you the forward look. So I think on a daily basis, I have to educate myself, listening to good podcasts like the Overture Edge, for example.
Oh, thank you.
Or listening to all the good publications that are out there that give you a broad perspective of what's going. I think every day is a new day. We talk about fighting for tomorrow's PO, not just resting on our laurels, right? And with that, I think you have to keep abreast of what's going on in the world every day and not just looking back.
And you keep Nick, you keep your CEO, Nick, abreast of what's going on, and you have constant communication and dialogue about that.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the man's a machine himself. It's very little that I update him on that he doesn't already know. But what we do is give each other the perspective. And I do think as we continue to grow, the CFO role is going to be able to touch more data set points that he can. So, for example, there's customers I'm talking to, he might be talking to a different set, or I might talk to an outside sales leader and he's talking to a different one. At the end of the day, we can then compare notes.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is coverage as well. And I think a good CFO is almost an extension of the CEO office. I talked to him recently about that is, how do you define a CFO role? But it's really what the CEO needs.
Yes.
It's really what the company needs.
Sure.
And again, it can be accounting for some people. For other people, it can be more COO type responsibilities, or it can be leading people functions, whatever you need them to be.
Excellent. There's one more area I want to probe today. Okay. And knowing you and reading a little bit about you, I know you're a soccer guy, right?
I am.
Okay.
Big soccer fan.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm a baseball guy, so competitive, right?
For sure.
Growing up competitive. And in business, it's the same thing, right? There's a lot of similarities, right? How we drive a successful company, how we manage, how we coach, right? How do we get those championship teams? So that last aspect, I talked about on the 4 is that will to win. It's inside, right? It's that will to win. Define it for me. Do you agree with that will to win? Do you have to have a will to win in order to have a high-performing organization and a strong CEO-CFO relation? Talk to me a little bit about your will to win.
I think the short answer is absolutely yes, you do. I do think it's fire in the belly is what a coach used to say to me. You either have it or you don't.
Right.
I think growth is not something to be afraid of or the will to win, because the opposite is true. To not have it can lead to being somewhat of a plateau in your business, and before you know it, the world around you has moved on. So the will to win is striving while you're ahead.
Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned soccer. If you can indulge me for a minute, I'll talk about another leader that I've always admired growing up, which is Sir Alex Ferguson. For any soccer fan out there, he spent well over 2 decades as the head coach at Manchester United. There's a couple of things he did that I always remember. So the first game I ever watched was in 1993. They were in stoppage time. They were 1-0 behind to a team called Sheffield Wednesday, and their captain scored 2 goals in added time to help them win the game, and they ended up winning their first championship in over 30 years at that time. Yeah. And then there's a famous game in 1999 in Barcelona where they beat Bayern Munich, again with 2 goals in injury time. They were 1-0 down. They were not the better team that night, but they won by 2 goals when the game was over. And that is the will to win.
Yes.
Alex Ferguson was renowned over his career to change when he was ahead. So he had this thing in his autobiography where he talked about the first day of preseason when all the players were back. They had normally just come off a championship winning season because they won more than they lost. But he used to look into the eyes of every player, and he could tell by that first day of preseason whether they were going to win and whether they had the will to win.
Yeah.
And there's 2 or 3 times in his career where he has sold marquee players, much to the shock of a lot of maybe the people who follow soccer. But in his mind, he knew that they had lost that hunger. He knew that they had lost that drive, and he would often replace them with maybe younger, more hungrier folks. David Beckham, who's one of the most famous people on the planet, was one of those beneficiaries.
Yes.
He came on the scene very young in age, and there was a more marquee player that was sold ahead of him to make way for David Beckham. So he had the ability to always have the drive and never ever be beaten, which a lot of people at Porter have.
Yes.
And
talk to me about that.
They do.
How does that translate?
Well, we talk about winning all the time, and it's not in an arrogant it's not in an arrogant way. I guess that's the word. It's more about winning feels good, and winning isn't just winning a soccer game. Winning is, hey, I worked hard to harness this relationship with this customer. I heard them, I listened to what they needed, and then I understood how to make them better what they're doing. So when we sell them a product and sell it in the way that only Porter can, and they're successful at their project, that's what's winning. Yeah. We believe winning is a shared thing. It's not just for us at the expense of other people. And again, I've really noticed in our industry, it's again fiercely competitive, but we like to win together. We like the industry to win.
So is it safe to say that because you and your CEO have a will to win, it's contagious throughout the whole organization and the team?
Oh, absolutely. Okay. And I think the opposite were true. If one of them didn't do it, the rest of the executive team would be looking upon you going, well, which is it? You know, I know the CEO is obviously the leader, but if the rest of the team see the CEO and the CFO on the same page, because it's such an important relationship and they're both driving the bus in the same direction with that fire in the belly and that will to win, it brings everyone else along. It brings the executive team, it brings middle management, and all of our teammates along. It really does.
No, that's excellent. And I was just going to say that when the rest of the exec team sees that the CEO and the CFO have that will and they're on the same page, the other execs get right on. Yeah. That's what it seems.
And the winning as well is relentless.
Yeah.
It's not just being satisfied with what we did today. Again, talking about Alex Ferguson changing in your head. We're very innovative. You know, we're selling other people's products, right? But we're still an innovative company in how we sell and how we go to market. And that comes because we're never satisfied. So that will to win gets there. And it's contagious amongst the team, it really is.
So one last question on this. It's never being satisfied.
For sure.
Right?
I think that's what will to win is.
Yes. And, you know, that kind of wraps it up. It's not being satisfied.
Yeah.
It's always looking for what's next.
Yeah, what's next?
Excellent. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. And I know you and I could sit here and talk about this for hours upon hours. You know, but one thing I think we can take away from our discussion is that a strong, healthy relationship between the CFO and CEO is vital for a company to reach its true potential.
Absolutely. And I think it can often be the difference between winning or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will to win, we can get back to that. We could talk about that for days. Well, Sean, I want to thank you for coming in. I really, really appreciate it. Sean Burke, CFO from Porter & Pipe, thank you for your time today.
No, pleasure's all mine, John. Thank you.
And I want to thank our audience for taking their time. And I want them to look in the future for our future episodes, conversations with top business leaders on all of our social media outlets. So with that, I want to say thank you and have a great rest of your day, and thank you for tuning in.
Thanks for being a part of the Overture Edge, powered by the Overture Group. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our LinkedIn page, and visit us at theoverturegroup.com to stay up to date on the latest executive recruiting and compensation trends. If you have any questions or would like to contact us, please email John at jliacone@theoverturegroup.com. That's JLIACONE@theoverturegroup.com. Thank you again for listening.